Hi, I'm Tim. Join me in this video as we go over the inner workings, tips and tricks of programming the Spektrum DX6 transmitter. Let's get to it. The short video you saw of the F-22 flying is a foam board model. Very easy to build. The complete build instruction with plans, there's a link in the description to that. Give it a try. It's a lot of fun. It's a very good example of using the DX6 for elevon function. So in this video, what I'd like to do is take a little bit of a deeper dive into the DX6 transmitter, and more importantly, how to program it to unlock many of its features that can make your understanding and use of this RC equipment a lot better for your flying. We will not go through every single feature. That's best in the manual. Note the manual is pretty big at 225 pages. There's only about 45 pages that are in English. The rest are in other languages. If for whatever reason some of my viewers, they don't have this manual, just Google Spektrum DX6 manual. You'll find it somewhere on the internet. Usually Horizon Hobby has it somewhere. I've been using the DX6 for a number of years. It's not the newest transmitter out there for computer radios. You'll see other ones with larger screens, but many of the functions are the same: dual rate, expo, servo reversing, system setup. If you learn on this one, it's applicable for almost any computer radio that you may have. One other thing you'll find out anytime you're dealing with really any computer products to include these radios is, in my case, the manual that came with this radio does not quite match up with the software with the transmitter. And a case of this is there are three types of models listed in the manual. What they call Acro, which is really a fixed wing airplane, a trainer, what would fly just a fixed wing airplane, Sailplane, and helicopters, because those three types of RC models have different characteristics: swash plates, servo mixing for penetration on the sailplanes, and so forth. But what happens when you turn this on, there's actually a fourth model, the quadcopters. It's not in the manual. So just accept that. Things change over time. The software will evolve, and if there's a problem, just Google it. You can find out further information. So just a little bit of history on radio RC transmitters. When transmitters first came out in the early 1960s, they were electronics, so you had control of the airplane, but there was no miniature computers inside to take advantage of computerized capabilities. Even things like mixing, elevons, servo reversing, it all had to be done mechanically. In about 2004, Spektrum, the company that makes this transmitter, came out with the very first series of transmitters on 2.4 gigahertz frequencies. This allowed binding between the transmitter and a specific receiver, which allowed one transmitter through the 2.4 gigahertz technology and the computer memory inside to control multiple models. This changed everything. So with this transmitter, there's a total of 250 model memories that can be stored inside here. Everything that's specific to that aircraft, control throw, dual rate, expo, servo, direction of travel, is tailored to that specific model. So I have about 25 models programmed in here, all with this one transmitter. It just changed everything for the better and literally saved us modelers hundreds of dollars by just requiring one transmitter for a wide range of model aircraft. So one thing I want to emphasize here, and I'll emphasize a lot throughout the video, I'll put a picture of it up here, and there's a PDF of this that you can download from the description, is if you look at the manual, I believe it's on page 13. If you just look, these are the three models in the memory: the Acro, or the fixed wing, the sailplane, little picture, and the helicopter. As I mentioned, there's a fourth one not listed here for quadcopters. But what I've done is I'm going to focus on the Acro, the airplane. So this section right here, I have printed out here and is available for download in the description. And the key thing is there is a system setup list and a function list, and it's very important to get these two things straight in your mind, otherwise you'll get confused. The system setup list, in a nutshell, are things that you do when you first create a model in the memory, and you only do them once. A good example is naming the model. You only name it once. You don't do anything at the field to alter the name. So things like aircraft type, the model type, the trim setup. You do that once it's set up. So when you create a new model, and we'll do this later on in the video, we'll go through this entire list. Once this is complete, next it goes over to the function list. The function list can be accessed daily at the RC field. You may want to change some things, the servo setup. You may want to adjust the dual rate of the expo. You may want to adjust the elevon, the mixing. You may want to do a range test. All those things are in the function list over here. And notice when you turn it on, it's very easy to go to the function list to go through here. If you wish to look at the system setup for whatever reason, that's a selection right down here. And when you select system setup, you jump over to this one, and it will alert you when you go over to the system setup that the transmission function, the transmitter, is turned off because they don't want you mucking around with this stuff with potentially a running engine, maybe the engine to go to the opposite direction, depending on a quirk of the programming. So again, system setup, one time, you turn it on, no transmitter. You shouldn't do it day to day. The function list you can check from time to time. This is a very commonly used list. And one other thing I'll point out is the aircraft type. You notice it goes over to three things here. The aircraft type, and again, I'll demonstrate this in the video. If you select elevons, like in the F-22 that I showed, once you determine the model has elevons, it'll call up different things to the function list. It makes sense when you see the video. So this is the DX6 Spektrum. Let's go ahead and turn it on and take a look at the main screen. You're going to hear the main screen a lot. So we simply turn on the switch, take a second, DX6, and here is the main screen. So let's go over this. The first thing is a model name. I've just put in Tim Test for this discussion. Otherwise, you put the name of the model. This is the amount of battery power that you have, 5.4 volts. This is probably one of the most important icons here on the main screen, because 4.3 volts, an alarm will go off and you don't have enough electrical power to safely fly. The 4.3 for alkaline batteries is so important. I actually have a little reminder on the bottom, but there is a alarm built in for that. This picture shows that we have a Acro or airplane selected. The other options would be a sailplane, helicopter, gyro. These are the trim settings. So these relate to the trim settings along here. And so for the elevator, we'll just play with that. I'll put in some up trim. You can see the little icon goes down and then back to the neutral setting there. Same for all four of the displays. Note also that there is not a DSM sign up here. So let's just go to another model and I'll explain what's going on here. We'll go to the Timber. And I'll show how to do this in a second. Notice that for the Timber, in addition to the name, we have DSMX. This is a wording, letters for the spectrum, connectivity for the spread spectrum techniques. What that means is that the model is binded to, this transmitter is binded to that receiver. In the other case, that it wasn't there. We just had a test model in there. We have not binded it to any receiver. Thus, this section is blank above Tim Test. And then the other minor thing here, this timer is how much time we spent with this model with the transmitter on. The other thing I'd like to point out is this 5 minutes. You can set this. We'll show you later how. This is a countdown timer. With my models planned on a 5-minute flight, the little voice inside the transmitter will call out the time so I can safely land. It's a super handy feature for your flying. There's one other trick that's really quite important, and it regards the voltage right here. What we're going to do is hit the back button, and you'll see that we can easily set the volume of the transmitter. So here it's set on 10. We can adjust that to louder. We click it once,
60.
And then it goes back to the voltage. So what I'm going to do is turn it down a little bit to 10 just for this video, just so it doesn't, it's not too loud and annoying. But there's 10. We click it once, and it's 5.2 volts. The other thing you'll see me use a lot is a scroll wheel. We can turn it with our thumb like that, or we can press it for a click to do different functions. So I'll either be scrolling or pressing. One other trick I want to show you that I demonstrated briefly is if we push both the back and the clear buttons at the same time, we'll get to a list of all of our models. So it's very easy by scrolling to pick any model that we want. just by pushing those at the same time. The other thing is we're on the main screen, and again, this is the main screen. We can easily turn this scroll wheel once we have the flight monitor screen. These are all the settings for aileron, throttle, etc. Rudder is 100 to 100, but this is just a check before you fly that you're in the mode that you want and how much your controls are set, and we'll go through that with a dual race. To get out of that, just click it one time and you're back to the main screen. So let's pretend that we're going to set up a new model. As we discussed previously, the system setup will come up first and the function list once that is filled out. So to set up a new model, we can click both buttons. These are the model select. We go to the very end. We can add a new model. So we click that and we're going to create a new model. And notice we are in the system setup. If we look at this paper again, we're in the system setup. We're going to go through this whole list of things right now, setting it up, and then go over to the function list. So this, and again, the main screen, we go back to the main screen, don't want to do that. So we move the scroll wheel once to the right, and now we're going to select our model. Okay, we've done that. It's going to be an Acro model. And we're going to pick the type of model. Again, these are the four that I mentioned, the Acro, Helicopter, Sailplane, and Gyro, because I call them different portions of the menu. We'll go with the Acro right now. Data is going to be reset if you have something in there. We'll go ahead and accept that. The model name, it's a good idea to give it a name. It comes up automatically as Acro. And so what we do is just with the scroll wheel, we move over. If we want to change the A, you can see down here a list of the characters right here. We go ahead and push the button once. That'll select it. And now we can select anything we want. Let's say we want to put in a T. We go to T, set that. We go to the next one with the scroll wheel, push. Let's say we put an M, an I rather. Click it once. We go to an M. And if we want to get rid of a letter, we select it. And between the capital and the small letters is a blank spot. Click that. And there's our name. We scroll over, go back, and our model name is done. Now take a look at the aircraft type. Again, this is not well named. I can't tell you a better name, but what we're going to do is there are two selection menus. Notice the aircraft type at the top here, and when we click either in the normal or the normal here for the wing of the tail, they have additional what I'll call pull down menus. So we'll click once on that, and here are different aircraft types. You can have dual aileron, flaperon, aileron and flap. You can see the pictures in the description. What I have used oftentimes is elevon, and if you click that, there's actually two elevons. One here, elevon B, depending on how your servos, just to get the right throw. So we can click that, and then for the tail, we click on the normal, and we can cycle through dual rudders, normal, etc. Again, this is just for the aileron. There's other selections for other aircraft types. Again, it's best to review the manual, but that is what the aircraft type is for on this. So we'll select that. We'll go back up to the list again. The F mode setup is something that I don't use too much. It's a flight mode for things like mixing ailerons and, elevators with trim, for example, for a sailplane. Spoken flight mode, I don't use much at all. It can tell you with a voicemail from the transmitter what type of flight mode you're in. The channel assign is something that I never fiddle with. If you want to, you could go down the throttle and put another control function in the throttle. I'm not quite sure why anybody would do that, but it is an option in the menu. The trim setup is more for advanced aircraft like gliders. Depending on how you're flying, you can set up automated trim settings for throttle, elevator, and so forth. I don't use it for normal flying. The model utilities are just utilities. You can create a new model, delete a model, copy it, sort the model list, etc. So if you want to sort it, you just click that, select it, and you can move it around here. We'll go back up to the list. Warnings. This is a very important one that I use a lot. So what happens is it should be set at 10%. What'll happen is, I'll demonstrate that, well, I won't demonstrate it. What'll happen is, if your throttle is out of idle, when you turn on your transmitter, it'll say throttle high. It's a very handy thing to have, and there's other warnings in there you can check in the manual. Telemetry is empty here. You need a module if you want to have telemetry with your radio. The pre-flight setup was a little bit of an oddball thing, I think. What it is you can, you could put canopy attached receiver battery test in there if you want to activate it. Notice that the other ones, I and H stands for inhibit. That means that function is not set up. I don't use this pre-flight on the transmitter at all. The frame rate is a technical thing for digital and analog servos. I just leave it in the mode DSMX. Binding is very important. You have to bind the receiver to any, bind the transmitter to any receiver you have. It works well with the Spektrum radios. When you bind it, this lets you bind through the menu. The other way to bind, if you don't use this menu, is when the receiver's in the bind mode of the flashing light, you simply hold down the little bind button here. You hold that down while you turn on the transmitter. And notice that there was a bind failed because it couldn't find a receiver to bind at this time. But that's a way to bind to your receiver. The trainers are various ways to set up a second transmitter as a trainer, either through wires or through a wireless connection. Buddy box. Digital switch setup, I do not use on my normal day-to-day flying. The center tone is, I never use that. Sound utilities, you can add different types of sounds to various categories. I don't mess around with this much at all. The system settings are just things. I put my name for the system, contrast, backlight. Notice the battery alarm. I have alkaline batteries, 4.3 volts. That's very handy. And if the transmitter is not being used for 10 minutes, it'll alert. So that's a good feature to have for the system settings. The transfer card, I don't use that. And that completes the system setup that you do once you create a model. We're going to now go to the main menu. And everything is set up. You can see the name we typed in Tim. It's an Acro model, 5 minutes. Everything's set up here. So if we push this scroll wheel again, because we've already done the system setup, it goes into the function list. So here's a function list right here. And notice that that's the same function list as right here. So we've gone through this entire one-time menu. Now we're going to go through the function list that you use on a more regular basis at the field and before heading out to fly. We're complete with the system setup list at one time when we turn it on, and we'll push once with the scroll wheel. Here's our function list. Again, the main screen is at top. Anytime you want to get to the main screen, it'll just bounce back and forth. So the first thing is the servo setup. This is a very important list. And what will happen is, this is a pull-down menu. If we click once, it could be travel, it could be sub-trim, or it could be reverse. And we use this all the time. So here we are with the travel menu. And you'll notice down here, they have throttle, aileron, elevator, rudder, etc. So we can use the elevator, and notice that the little icon goes back and forth for -100 and +100% of the movement. So let's go to travel, and we'll click on that once, and let's just say that we want to adjust the elevator travel. That it's a pretty sensitive model. We don't want 100%. We're going to reduce it a little bit. We can click on it, and we can reduce that travel to, say, 80% if we had a little bit of an acrobatic model. Notice when we do the elevator, it goes 80, plus or minus because that is set in the travel. Notice also that if we wanted perhaps more up than down, we could go up, and by holding that up, we can adjust just the up travel if you want a differential. So here we have 80 down and 90 up, and that is reflected in the diagram to the left. So let's set this back up to 100. Put the stick down, click. Oops. So let's go back with the scroll wheel, click this once, and let's go to subtrim. What the subtrim does is if you have trimmed with these normal trim levers slightly up or down and you want to recenter the trim, you can click on this and just very gently, with very small movements, get the trim back to neutral so that your trim on the front of the transmitter is back to 0. The other thing that's super important is reverse. When we click this, let's pick the elevator. If it's going in the wrong direction from the transmitter, say this is down and it should be up, by clicking this, that'll reverse the elevator. So any of the controls, that's a very handy feature to have. So we go back to the list. Now, dual rate and expo. I showed you. I'd like to give a short description of the differences between dual rate and expo before we go into the function of the transmitter of doing it. This is just a control surface. Let's say it's a stabilizer and elevator. Notice I've beveled the edge so it can go down and up. Let's just, for the purpose of discussion, assume this is the elevator. Full throw is 45 degrees up. Full down is 45 degrees down. With dual rate, you may want to have full throw for an acrobatic model, but with this amount of throw, it's going to be a very touchy elevator for landing. You may want to reduce the throw to perhaps half of that for the landing so you don't have this much input to the elevator. With dual rates, you can do that. Dual rates normal may be full throw, 50%, it only goes up half as much. So with dual rates on the lower rate, the elevator only moves this much, and we'll show you how to set and select that. The other thing that is important is what we call expo, which is short for exponential control. What will happen with expo is if this is full up, 100% up, 100% down, and let's say the stick moves 1 inch to get full up, 1 inch to get full down. With expo, say we put in 50% expo, you'll see that on the when we do programming on the transmitter. With 50% expo, for example, with no expo, half stick, it goes half as much. With expo, half stick may go this much. It flattens the curve, so the elevator moves a very small amount for half the stick travel, but if you need the full throw, when you go all the way, it very quickly goes up to that amount. What the expo does, when you want very precise control near the neutral point, you can put an expo. A lot of pilots use that to smooth out landings or just controls because it's much more precise. Instead of going this way with half stick, it only goes this much. It's a pilot technique. So what will happen is, let's go ahead and go through this. With the scroll wheel, we'll go down and I will pick elevator just so I use this stick here. Now notice, because we have it set at 100%, when we move the elevator, it goes 100 down and 100 the other way. The arrow points to the way it's going. So it is just a normal elevator, 100% up and down. First of all, we're going to turn on a switch. So what we'll do is we are going to pick switch C, located right here. And it's a 2-position switch. So what we'll do is we'll go to C, we'll click on that, and what will happen is you'll notice when we move switch C up here that the little box goes back and forth. Okay? So we have the dual rate and expo. We're going to use elevator just for ease of demonstration. And what we're going to have with our switch up here is a choice of 1 or 0. Let's flip back and forth. And notice it says 1 or 0 down here to switch C. So we're going to have two choices on this. What will happen is for the dual rate, let's just say we want 100% on the dual rate, and we want the expo to smooth it out along the center by about 30%. Let's call it 40%, just so you can see the impact. So when we have this selected with position number 1 on the switch, what will happen is, as we go down and up, it is still fully at 100% for the dual rate. But notice that with the expo, for the first portion of the movement, if the stick is being moved down about halfway on my thumb to the right, notice it's just 29% of the way, because the expo is taking that out. As we continue going on, it very rapidly goes up to 100%. What this means with the expo here is the first half, 50% of the travel, has a much less distance traveled on the elevator, which will allow for smoother control. Now we can flip the switch up here, C, to the top position, and now we can, if we want, have the dual rate and make that a lesser amount. Let's make it 70% because we have an acrobatic model. We want to have less than full throw just for a little bit easy control. We'll keep the expo at 0%. Notice that the lines here, instead of being up here at 100% down to 70%, as we move the control stick, you can see the numbers here, they just go to 70. And if we want to go back to full throw, we flip switch C, we have 100% throw with the expo. So this is a case with this switch C, we can flip it between a dual rate of 100% for full control with 40% expo over the center, and then for initial flights, 70% just less control throw on the elevator. And you can do that for any of the controls that you want, rudder and aileron. Throttle cutoff allows you to cut off the throttle with the radio here. I don't use that. It's inhibited on the way I fly. Throttle curve are some types of settings you can have for throttle for specialized applications, typically helicopters. I do not use that for my flying. Analog switch setting, I don't even know what that is. That is something I've not ever used for my flying. The digital switch setup, again, is something a little bit different. I have never used that for my flying. The mixing is a specialized thing. You'd have to refer to the instruction for detailed, to the manual for detailed instructions, but you can mix controls. You might want to mix rudder with elevator. For sailplanes, for example, when you're going fast, you might automatically mix some down trim. That is what you can do with the mixing. The range check is important. We can do that at any time. This is full power because it says full power right here. When you're in the range test mode, if you walk off 30 meters, which is about 30 paces, it'll put a dummy load onto the radio. And if the model works at 30 paces, 30 meters, you have full power for regular flight. The way to get into range test is on the DX6, you simply push the bind button. That'll put you into the range test. I'll go ahead and push that button now. You can see they're in the reduced power, and you can test the distance at 30 meters. The timer is an extremely handy thing to have on this DX6 transmitter. And what I do is I have a countdown setting. I set it for 5 minutes. You can adjust that. It starts when I move the throttle stick over 25%. And then what you can do is, I'm not going to worry about clearing the timer because every time I turn off the transmitter, it will reset it. These are the alerts. So what I like to do, for example, is every minute, I'll have the voice say 4 minutes, 3 minutes, 2 minutes. Each minute I will have them do a voice. I'll do 30 seconds with a voice, tones, expiration. I will put a voice, whatever you wish to do. And as you're flying, you'll hear the computer say, where you are with the time of the flight. Very handy so you don't have to look down. Telemetry is another module. I do not have that set up on this radio. The custom voice setup, you can have the transmitter give you voice commands over various things that are happening. I don't work for that. VTX is an added functionless item that's not in the manual. Once you see the fat shark on the band there, that is for a video link for a drone. Lap timer is tied to drones as well. I would imagine I do not use that. The system setup was what we did on the original one. We go to the system setup, it'll bring us to this first one. And again, we're not going to go there, but you can see the system setup on the end. And finally, on the monitor, go that. And there are just an indication of how far your controls are set. And you can see even here, the elevator is 70 up and 70 down, but we flip the switch, we can go 100 up and down. So that just is another check to how the radio is working before you fly. This monitor list, we go up to the main menu and we click one time over here. This is the same monitor list that we had before. So that is a snapshot of the system setup, the function list, just to give you an overview before going into the manual. Again, to get a manual, if you don't have one, just Google Spektrum DX6 manual and you should be able to pick one up. Thank you for joining me in this video and going through some of the tips and tricks of the DX6 transmitter. I like the Spektrum systems a lot. Whatever radio you favor, feel free to use it. This has worked well for me for a number of years. The folks seem to know what they're doing. The menus can be a little bit complicated, but once you go through them and study them, they make sense, and it will make your RC flying just more enjoyable. Good luck out at the field.